welcome back to For the Meeple, by the Meeple. As always, I'm Mike Carpenter, and today we are taking a look at Shadows over Camelot. This game has a special place in my heart because it's the first designer game I ever bought, and it introduced me to the cooperative genre. Up until then, I had never even heard of cooperative board games, and when I got this one out on the table and saw how big the board was, and I read the rule book and I saw how the game was going to play, I fell in love with it. Let me show you why. Here we go. Here we have the setup for Shadows over Camelot. Once the board is ready to go, players are going to randomly receive a coat of arms. These coat of arms have a distinct color and the name of the knight that the player will be playing as. Each knight also has a special power that is located here on the top right. The rest of the coat of arms sheet is going to work as a reference sheet for the players. The middle area explains the ability of the relics that you can obtain from completing quests successfully, and then the bottom is going to explain kind of the turn or the gameplay of each turn for the players. Each player will receive a die in their color that will be set to 4 to start the game. That represents how many life points the knight has, and each player will also receive a miniature with the color of their knight as the base. Each player's miniature is going to start in the castle of Camelot, and then each player will receive a loyalty card. There's 8 of these, and they will all be shuffled, and then each player will receive 1 face down. On these cards, you'll see that the player will either be loyal or a traitor. If the player receives the traitor card, they will be referencing this back of the coat of arms sheet. It's a good idea to show each player this card before the game begins, not once everyone has received their loyalty card, so that it's an easier opportunity for the traitor to kind of see what they're going to be doing once they are revealed. The final thing to do before gameplay begins is give each player 1 Merlin card, and then shuffle the white cards and give each player 5. Now, players are going to take one of the 6 cards in their hand and place it in Camelot. Players are then going to decide amongst themselves who is going to receive what cards so that they can begin the quest with a decent amount of opportunity to complete a quest. Not every player has to take 1 card. One player could take all the cards, or they could distribute those cards however they would like to. Once that is done, the gameplay begins. On a player's turn, they're going to do exactly 1 progression of evil and exactly 1 heroic action. There are 3 options for the progression of evil. The first is to draw a card from the black deck and apply its effects immediately. These cards are almost always bad for the knights, and what they will do is either make a quest more difficult to achieve or directly influence the knight's life points or the cards in their hand. The second option is to add 1 siege engine to the area in front of Camelot. To do so, you just simply take 1 from the supply and put them in any of these available spaces. If at any point there are 12 siege engines in front of Camelot, the game immediately ends and the knights would lose. If there was a traitor present, he or she would win. The third option is to simply take your 1 life point, and that is done by just simply turning your die, and that would be your progression of evil. There are 5 heroic actions available. The first is to move to a new quest, so that would be your entire turn. You couldn't do anything else on your turn. Now, you'd also have to be aware of how many spaces are available at these quest locations. Some quests only allow 1 person to be present at a time, and some quests allow several knights to be present at the same time. If you are ever the only person at a location, because it will not allow anyone else, or you're just simply the only person at that quest, and you leave, all cards that have been played, if the quest is not completed, are removed. The second available heroic action is to perform the heroic action of one of the quests that you are at. So what that means is there are going to be several ways to play white cards at these quests, and if you are at a certain location already and you don't have to move to get there on your turn, you can play one of the white cards from your hand to progress the quest that you are at. The third option is to play one special white card. Special white cards are indicated by this logo in the top left corner, and they do not directly impact a quest most of the time, but they do help the knights in some way. The next option is to discard 3 identical cards from your hand to gain 1 life point. That's self-explanatory, and then you can accuse 1 knight if there are at least 6 siege engines in front of Camelot. Now, I said that you would do exactly one of those actions. However, there is an exception that if you take a life point, you can do a second heroic action on your turn, but you may not do the same one that you did first on your turn. And then at any point on your turn, you are able to use your special power. Like any good game with knights, there are swords and shadows over Camelot, and these swords have a white side and a black side. Players are going to be using these swords to keep track of the progress throughout the game. If there are white swords on the track, it means the knights have successfully accomplished a quest. If there are any black swords, those represent a quest that the knights would have lost earlier in the game. The goal is to have, at the end of the game, is to have more than half of these spaces filled with white swords. So players would have to have at least 7 white swords. And one thing that makes this game difficult towards the end of the game is that you have to fill all of these spots. So once you get 7 swords, if you still have 4 empty spaces, you have to either successfully complete quests, which can be very difficult, and do that before one of the other ways of losing occurs, or you can simply lose quests and fill the spaces with 4 or 3 or 2 of the black swords as you go along and finishing the game. Now we're going to look at each of the quests and see how they play. If a black card is ever drawn that says Pix on it, you will add 1 of the Pix miniatures to one of the open spaces at this quest location. If at any point all 4 spaces are full, this quest is immediately lost for the knights, and then you can check this indicator at the top to see how many black swords are added to the round table. If there are any knights present, they will lose 1 life point, and then you will also add 2 siege engines to the area in front of Camelot. Now, how do we complete those quests though? If you have players at this location, there are 7 spaces available for knights to be there at the same time, so players can work on this and the Pix quest at the same time. They can work together at a single location. To do so, as a heroic action, the player is going to play a 1 first, and then maybe a second player plays a 2 on their turn, and then play comes back to the active player here, and they play a 3, and until you're going to play that 1 card at a time until it gets to 5. You have to play this in consecutive order. You cannot bounce around 1, 5, 2. It has to be in order. The Holy Grail quest at the top of the board is going to require cards that look like the Holy Grail in good condition and in bad condition. So if you were to go to the Holy Grail location, and again you can have up to all 7 knights at this location at the same time, the player on their heroic action will play a good white Holy Grail card to the left side of this tracker. And if players ever draw a black card with the poor conditioned Holy Grail, they are going to place that at the right end of the tracker. And as these cards accumulate on the track, they're going to be going closer and closer and closer. And if at any point you get to a situation where you have to add a Holy Grail card to a space that has a despair card, you will simply remove the despair card, and all the cards on the right side of that card will remain in play, and then now you'll have an empty space for the next player to put a Holy Grail card in. And that would continue. You'd knock out the next one, and then you'd put one down. So it would effectively take 2 Holy Grail cards per space that is covered by a despair card. If the knights can ever get all of the spaces on the Holy Grail track covered in a good white Holy Grail card, they will win 3 swords. They'll divide an X amount of cards, in this case 7, and each player present at the quest will receive 1 life point. If they lose, each knight at the quest would lose 1 life point, and 3 black swords would be added to the round table. Now, there is an interesting part to this quest that once it is completed, whether it is successful or failed, the board is going to flip over, and anytime a despair card is drawn now, instead of being played at the Grail, player is simply going to add a siege engine to the area in front of Camelot. So that is a way of really progressing the siege engines and filling all 12 of those spaces to end the game in the favor of the bad guys and not the knight. Next we have the Black Knight quest. Players, there can only be 1 knight at a time at this location, and what they are doing to complete this quest is to play pairs of cards numerically on each of these sections of their side of the competition. So the player 1 card at a time, so essentially 1 turn at a time, would be playing a card face up in these locations. Now, you must have a pair here, and you must have a matching pair of a different number in this side of the location. At the same time that is happening, there is a possibility that players will be drawing these black cards that are black knights. Now, in the top left corner, there is a number 1, and this one is a 7. So as you can see, there is a wide range of numbers that can be played at the Black Knight competition quest. So as the player draws that, each of these cards is going to say, if played face down, draw 1 white card. So if the card is low, I'm going to play that face down. And what I'm essentially saying, while I cannot say it out loud, I'm essentially saying that's a low card and you don't have anything to worry about. And I would do that because it would allow me to draw 1 of the white cards that become very valuable as the game goes on. And if there's a high card, I'd probably play that face up for my fellow knight, so that they know that they need to play higher numbers to complete that quest. Because what you're going to do is, once one of these sides has completed all 4 cards, whether it be good or bad, it does not matter how many cards the other side has, you will flip every card face up and compare the amounts. So in this case, there would be 8 for the Black Knight and 10 for King Arthur. So the knights would win this quest and receive the award in the space indicated. And next we have the Lancelot Dragon quest. So one side of this board is Lancelot and one side of the board is dragons. So when a player draws a Lancelot or a dragon card, it will look like this. And if you're still on the side of Lancelot, you're going to refer to this side, and if it's the dragon, you'll refer to that number. Now, same thing goes here. You can play these cards face up or face down. There's a bit of a penalty at times for playing face down here, so most of the time people play this card face up unless they're desperate. But with this one, there's 5 cards for Lancelot, and there is a 3 of a kind and a pair for the knight that is at this location. Again, once all 5 spaces are filled on either side, you're going to flip all the cards face up and see who has the higher number. And if the knights win, they'll receive white swords. If not, there will be black swords and a penalty to anyone at the quest at the time of failure. There is also a quest for Excalibur. So there's going to be a small relic in the middle space of this track. And as players go to this site, all they're going to be doing is discarding a card face down, and that would move the track, or would move the relic one step closer to the good side, whereas if a player ever draws a black card that says Excalibur, they're going to move the relic one step further from the good side. So this one is like a tug of war, and if the player is ever able to get the relic all the way to the furthest spot on the track towards the good side, the player that discarded the final card will receive the relic. Again, with this one, once it is completed, all Excalibur cards that are drawn are going to add one siege engine to the game. So as you can see, once those the Excalibur quest and the Holy Grail quest are completed, you have a serious issue with the siege engines over by Camelot. The final quest is the battle that is occurring in front of the Camelot castle. So as the siege engines get added, whether it be through the Excalibur or the Holy Grail quest, or players are using it as their progression of evil, or cards are having that action take place, there are going to be more siege engines on this area at some point in the game. To defend against that, a player that is currently in Camelot will play any combination of these fight cards that they would like. So in this case, the player has 10 points of fight value. They really only need 8, because the best a siege engine could be is 8 on this 8-sided die. And if they wanted to be risky, they could even try to fight it with a 5. And what they would do is simply show that card, then roll the die. In this case it was a 5, so the risk did not pay off, because all ties in this game go to the enemy. So the knight would suffer 1 life point damage here. The siege engine would not be removed, and the next player would take their turn. If the player was able to defeat the siege engine by maybe playing a smarter combination of cards, which would be a 7 in this scenario, and then rolled a 5, they would remove one of the siege engines from in front of Camelot. Now, players do not receive anything for beating these siege engines, meaning no white swords will be added to the round table, but the players do defend against the oncoming invaders, and Camelot will be safe, and the bad guys will not overcome the knights or beat them. The last thing worth mentioning here are the relics. The Holy Grail relic, the Excalibur relic, and the Lancelot armor relic are all obtained by completing the corresponding quest, and then players are going to look at their sheet here, and they'll be able to use a special ability given by each of these relics. So if players are able to complete enough of these quests to have 7 out of the 12 swords be white on the round table, and they have found the traitor, in case there is a traitor, the good guys will win. Now, if the 12 swords are placed on the table but the traitor has not been accused and revealed, then they will actually win the game, whether the good guys have accomplished 7 white swords or not. So that becomes a key part of the game where it builds suspense and a lot of accusations occur. So that is how you play Shadows over Camelot. Let me give you my final thoughts. As you can see, it looks like there's a lot going on in this game. When you lay this table out, if there's a non-gamer at the table, they may be intimidated by how much it appears to be. But then once you start playing, they typically realize you're really just making poker hands in this game, and you're working together to do that. So it feels like it looks like a complicated game. It feels like it's actually a somewhat simple game in terms of the complexity, but where the game shines is that it has that black deck of bad cards, and those cards really stifle the progression of the knights, whether it is through adding, once the Excalibur quest and the Holy Grail quests are completed, and they're just pumping siege engines onto that into the area in front of Camelot, that speeds the game up. If you haven't got a firm grasp on the number of white swords at the round table by the time those siege engines start building, you're going to be in a constant struggle to really catch up in the game, because you're going to have some of your knights fighting against the siege engines, which limits the number of knights you can send out onto quests to actually achieve those swords. The most difficult part in the game comes from once you get those 7 white swords, the game doesn't end. It's like you build up for this climactic moment of, here's 7 swords, we finally accomplished it, but the game isn't going to end. We still have to be able to fight off the siege engines so we don't get 12 siege engines. We have to make sure all of our players survive. If we all die, the game ends. There are multiple ways to lose, and really just one way to win the game, and it takes a long time to get to that completion, even though you've gotten the 7 swords. So every game I've played, there's that moment where it's like, how are we going to get those last swords before we run out of time? And that part of the game, it makes all the rest of the time leading up to it completely worth it. And it's so suspenseful there at the end. And if you tack on the fact that you know there's a traitor in the game, which sometimes you don't know for sure, and sometimes you do know for sure, it's just, if there's a traitor present and you have to figure out who it is during all the suspenseful turns you're making, trying to finish the game off in time, it just becomes something bigger than it feels at the beginning, and without getting a whole lot. It definitely does not get more complex in terms of mechanics, but the gameplay just surges at the end of this game, and that's what makes it enjoyable for me. This is one of the last few co-ops that I am really interested in playing. I've kind of gone away from cooperative games because of the overall feel. It's typically lackluster for me, but this one is the exact opposite. The feel of this game is what makes it. The atmosphere is fun. It looks like a fun game because of the miniatures and the vibrant colors, and the board is beautiful, and the board is big and spacious, and you've got a lot of pieces moving around. It's a fun game, looks fun, and it's a good game surprisingly, it is a very good game to introduce to new players. So, the pros of this game is it really does have a suspenseful end in most games, so that's a big thing. It's nice to have that moment at the end of the game where you don't know if you're going to win or not. And then, but some of the cons are, it is really simplistic. It's in terms of the actual quest and what you're doing. It's not the best gameplay, but again, the game is completely redeemed by the way the players play the game. If you get the right players in this game, it is going to be a great time. So I recommend this game, definitely recommend this game. For those of you who like cooperative games and have not tried this one out, I would definitely try this one. So thanks for watching, leave a comment below, and I will see you again next time. Thanks.